Good to go.
What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We're going from alt-right to alternative. We've got Monte Mader. It is Mader, right?
Yes, it is Mader.
Okay.
Yep.
Should have asked that beforehand, but
I
yeah,
always
Monte
forget
Mader,
something.
every time. Huge fan of her. I got the privilege of being on her podcast here. Just yesterday we recorded. It hasn't gone live yet. Just like this doesn't go live when we record it, but you know how that thing goes. But yeah, if you're not familiar with her content, she's the purple-haired nose ring wearing liberal your grandpappy warned you about, and we're super
Except my
excited.
hair's red.
Red, yeah, you know. Well, it's a few different colors, right?
There's three.
It's
Gotta keep it
difficult
spicy.
to tell. Difficult to tell with the lighting. It's also purple.
Got some purple
so,
hues coming out on this end. It's kind of like a car with pearlescent paint, you know.
Exactly.
It's just you walk around it, changes colors from every angle.
That's my favorite response to people that are like, you know, when they criticize tattoos and they're like, you wouldn't put a bumper sticker on a Beamer. And I'm like, but you would give it a custom paint job.
Yeah, you would. Mm-hmm.
for sure. I mean, you
But
might
yeah,
put
so
a
you're
bumper
a-
sticker on a BMW. I don't know.
You might.
Who
I don't
would?
know how-
I'm
I
sure
don't know
it
how you live.
exists.
I mean, you know, you can buy
You
some
do
old
you.
BMWs cheap. I do some very uncool things to a like 20-year-old BMW at this point.
That's fair. That's fair.
I was just
Mhm.
looking at some like early 2000s M5s to possibly switch to, but Addie didn't like the way it looked, so I didn't get it.
No, honestly, you are not the most mechanically inclined person, so that is a
That's also true.
horrible idea for you.
Yeah, I can get my Honda's oil changed on time. That's pretty. It's pretty much where
yeah.
where it ends.
Buying one of those older Beamers is the cheapest part about owning them. After
Yes.
that, everything gets stupid expensive, and really stupid expensive if you don't know how to work on it yourself. But
For
yeah, if
sure.
you're not familiar with Monty, she's a rock star, like legit rock star, a personal trainer, podcaster, content creator who makes Christians cry with all the knowledge she took after leaving their cult and the attitude she's gained since. It is beautiful to watch. So please, tell us your story, where you came from and how you got to where you are and what you're doing now. Because it's an incredible one. I know a little bit of it, but I never get tired of hearing it.
So, thank you for the wonderful intro. Thank you for having me. I grew up in far alt-right Christian nationalism, and I was raised on a cattle ranch in Gillette, Wyoming, and I was raised by Republican politicians who were deeply entrenched in the evangelical Republican movement. I was groomed from a young age by my dad to be a conservative judge. He was hoping that I would be an Amy Coney Barrett. And overturn Roe. Like, that was specifically what my dad explicitly laid out for me. I grew up in only Christian schools associated with churches, everything.
Can we just take a moment and be like, you really missed an opportunity here to have just like played the game until you
right?
got
Exactly.
to that point,
I could have saved
and then
the world.
you could have went Amy Coney Barrett, and then as soon as you're on the bench, just instantly Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Exactly.
I mean,
just
that would have
RBG
been.
it.
I mean, say what you will about your dad. I know nothing else about him, but you can't say that he wasn't involved with your life.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's the
I grew
one
up, but
thing, maybe.
he did. He was a little too involved sometimes,
No,
like
right.
because I grew up in this, this evangelical, like obviously being a woman, very high control environment, and the way that my dad raised my sisters, it was very much, well, your purpose in life is to grow up, get married, serve your husband, have as many kids as possible because the Bible commands us to fill the earth. And when I was younger, I eventually was IQ tested in school formally because I kept skipping grades and they were trying to figure out what's going on. And when my dad had that piece of paper and he realized, oh, like she's smart, like she's actually smart and I have proof, his vision for me changed. And his vision for me was again to be part of this kind of political system. He independently trained me in theology and American history my whole life, World War II history, apologetics. I was like the Charlie Kirk, but cuter and better at it. And so I
It's
grew
not
up in
that
these.
hard to be better, but yeah,
I was gonna say or cuter.
It's easy.
It's a real low bar on both accounts.
It's easy to demonize education when you dropped out of community college.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I grew up, I went to only exclusively Christian schools. I couldn't listen to secular music, couldn't watch Harry Potter. Like, it was very much, I was like entrenched. My family was so far to the right that we stockpiled arms against the government. And there was this conversation when I was growing up. We were taught to use guns as soon as we were old enough to hold them. And it was this conversation of if the government ever comes to attack us for our faith, we will be able to defend ourselves. We had caches of arms on the property. And when you're
very
young,
Waco situation,
very,
it sounds like.
very. And like, I remember being talked to about Waco and how the government overstepped and they had no right to do that. And when you're young,
to
and
be
it's
fair, a little bit.
There's a little bit of truth to that.
You know, there's
yeah. And so, but when you're growing up in it and you're only in this sphere, you have no idea. Democrats were demons. They were committing afterbirth abortions. The Clintons, every conspiracy theory about the Clintons. And I went to Liberty University, and so Jerry Falwell School. I mean, I was entrenched in it, and it wasn't until going to Liberty, because even as conservative as Liberty is, it was not nearly as conservative as the boarding school high school I went to. So it was a little bit of a step out. And I finally met people from different parts of the country. It was my first time living east of the Mississippi River, even visiting east of the Mississippi River. And I started to encounter, this is like my first time encountering different worldviews, even a little bit. And part of all of your course curriculums in Liberty, you have to study theology, like it's a required course. And the way that my course landed, I was able to do a study abroad program in Israel. And that was a big turning point for me, because we went through the whole country and you're studying this theology and all these things that happen and kind of in real time in the places they happened. But what triggered some things for me was in Jerusalem, when you would walk between the different neighborhoods, whether it was an Arab neighborhood or an Israeli neighborhood, and it was after one of the previous Gaza incidents. Bethlehem was closed. We couldn't access it. And you could feel this tension and this hatred. And I remember walking through Jerusalem at night and thinking, man, this could go off at any time. And it just made me start to question, like, why does this culture exist here? Why is there so much hatred and so much animosity? And I graduated Liberty, and I had done all the good Christian thing. I mean, I got an award in college for being like, it was like, the kid in the department who lives the Christian life the best award. I don't even remember what they called it, which is hilarious. You were voted
most likely to be the most Christian in the yearbook.
Exactly. And but I graduated and I had done like all these checkbook things right. Like I was all Christian schools. I had all the knowledge. I was studying theology. I was doing my devotions every day. I was reading my Bible. I met the dream man after college, and I got engaged, and I had waited. I was a virgin. I was doing all these things right. And when I was engaged, this was like the crack for me that really started the whole deconstruction. Was his half sister got pregnant, and she was 12. And we find out that she had been abused by her mom's boyfriend for 3 years. So this started when she was 9. And so I'm obviously not part of the conversation, but I'm like in the room because I'm family at this point. And I'm like, oh, this is wrong. I had been taught this version. I was at the time, no exceptions anti-abortion believer. I did not believe in exceptions for rape and incest. I would have said to you, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I am sitting in this room looking at this little kid. She's 12. And I'm like, oh, this is wrong. Like this. And at one point, her dad and her stepmom call me and they say, hey, we can't get back from work in time. Do you mind taking her to this birthing class? Because they were still like prosecuting, trying to figure out what to do. So I take her to this class, and it's her and a bunch of other teenage girls. I think the oldest girl was 19. Most of them were 15 or 16. She was 12. And all of the dads, except for one, were adult men. And none of them were there, except for the boyfriend of the girl who was age appropriate. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm 22, turning green. Pregnancy has been one of my top 3 fears my whole life. And I'm watching this class, but I'm sitting in the back, and I was like, Monte, this is wrong. Your belief system, this is not just. A just God this is not correct. And it was the first time that I was like, I need to look into this. Because again, I had been taught this very strict rhetoric. I believed at that time, at 22 years old, that afterbirth abortions were real. I had been told my whole life that was real. That just so all the listeners knows, that is infanticide, and it has always been illegal.
Yeah,
but I thought that was real.
It's murder.
It's murder. That's murder.
Definitely already a crime.
There's been no question there. And so it was after that, I remember I could not sleep that night. I was so disturbed And I was just like, I have to look into this. I had never thought to question my dad. I was raised by my father exclusively. My mom left when I was young. I'd never thought to question my dad, and I'd never thought to look into this. I had just accepted it as it was true because I had been taught this since I could learn language. And so I start doing independent research, and I learned, the first thing I remember learning was that 93% of elective abortions happen before 14 weeks. And I was shocked because my degree is in clinical exercise physiology and psychology. And so I knew all about the reproductive system and reproduction. I had to take collegiate level anatomy and physiology. And I was like, most of these are happening before the heart is even developed. What are you talking about? And it was this first crack of like, oh, I've been lied to. And that was really the beginning. And this is the same story that I have found with all the people that I know who have deconstructed in various ways. There's one subject that cracks the illusion,
Yep.
and then all the other cards fall. And so over the course of a decade, and part of it was my dad died. My deconstruction started in 2013. My dad died in 2016, which was like the most devastating loss of my life. But at the same time, it allowed me for the first time to think on my own, because there wasn't this external. I was very close to my dad, and the growing up years, most of my life was built around pleasing my dad, earning his affection. Love in my house was very conditional. And so when he was gone, it allowed for me to openly explore these beliefs and make these decisions on my own. And it just became one issue after the other. And I'd been independently studying theology under my father my whole life, in addition to what I did in college, and I continued that. But then I started deconstructing American history. My dad also was a amateur World War II historian, so I knew so much about that. And I spent 10 years, just every piece of information I could find and every question that I had, I started looking into. And one of the things that eventually happened, Trump happens in 2016. So 2016 is like the birth of my serious deconstruction. I had already been deconstructing for a few years, but Trump comes on the scene. And I'm like, how are any Christians buying this? Like, all of you people who told me adultery's wrong and honesty is important and racism's evil, all these things. And this man literally stands for everything that you have taught me is evil in the world. And I saw all the people that raised me, that I grew up with, just adhere to, worship, fall in love with this man. And I have never loved another human ever the way that people love Trump. And I was like, what in the idolatry is going on here? And that also was a huge turning point. So over the last 10 years, it's been learning and studying. And as things have progressed in the new MAGA world, I made a video one day. This is how I'm actually working on moving out of the fitness industry into content creation and authorship full time, because I had made a video in December of 2024 that said, I don't know why we're putting the Bible in schools when it's not working in churches. It was just a cheeky little cuff thing. And I don't read the comments because I'm busy and mental health. And for whatever reason,
I live in my comments.
I do not. I'm just so busy. I have so much going on. I try to read some of them, but I just can't sit with it.
Oh, no, half my content comes from, I'm like, just come on, I need the hate comments. And people, I think, have like figured it out and gotten scared, and they don't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's like, no,
I'm like, no, I need this. It's super easy. If I could just do a comment response and just troll the shit out of you and ruin your life, that's like takes half the work out of my day of doing research for like a real video. So.
Exactly. And that I've actually noticed even within the last few months has dramatically changed. But this guy his name was Derek, and he made a comment of, when have you been to church? I'm guessing never. And for whatever reason that day, I was not having it. I was like, mm-mm. So I pulled out my Bible and read this man for filth from scripture. And I laid out my credentials and my background and went to work. I was doing something else. I came back a couple hours later, and the video was at like 4.9 million views. And I was like, what the fuck? And that was my first introduction to, people, like, I have something to say that people actually want to learn. And all of this, my background, all this history I've been learning, all this independent study I've done, my own journey is valuable and it's helpful. And I can't imagine being as hard as the work is, happier and more fulfilled doing anything else, because it feels like it's really making a difference and it's speaking truth into these movements, because the core of MAGA is Christian nationalism. And so the way that you disintegrate these movements, what they've done is they've dressed their lust for power and control in Bible drag, and they've stamped Jesus's name on it, and none of it is scriptural. And so I've now built this community I have a bunch of really amazing Christians who follow me, who are like, thank you, I've been saying this didn't seem right. And I have deconstructed Christians and a large LGBT following. And this is like my dream job. And so I'm still doing music. I'm only gigging live once a week now, but I'm writing an album. I'm writing a book. I'm working on, by September, I will be in content creation writing full time, which will be the first time in 15 years. I haven't done personal training since I lost weight. I lost 90 pounds. And so it's been a lot of change in a short period of time. I was at 25,000 followers at the end of January, and probably by Friday I'll be at 1.5 million.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's nuts. Every time I look at it, I start laughing, and my cats are like, "What is wrong with you?" Because I'm like, I can't believe people are like listening to me. And again, I look the way I look. Like I'm a rock singer. I've been in entertainment for so long, but it's really meaningful. And I never thought that the difficulty of my journey and growing up in an abusive home and growing up in these environments would be so impactful. And I'm so thankful for it. I used to really struggle with it and struggle with the why. And I am deeply, deeply grateful for it now.
So when you say deconstructing, like, does that mean anything specific to you, or are you just using that as kind of the general term for just kind of deconstructing the narrative that you sort of centered the world around? Like, what exactly? That just feels like it feels like that term means more to you in this sense than just like deconstructing something.
So, and it's a little bit of both, because you can deconstruct anything. But for me, what I specifically mean, and I think people that are in the deconstruction space online and like they're using that hashtag, it's really about deconstructing Christian nationalism specifically.
Okay.
So for me, it's really about this Americanized Christian ideology that's been married to the Republican Party and deconstructing that whole worldview. Yeah. So it's a little bit of both, but mostly I mean specifically that worldview.
Sure. I mean, that it really explains why I've never liked organized religion at all in America. I've always looked at just like Eastern religions like Buddhism and been like, okay, that seems like they've got more going on than whatever it is that Christianity is right now. So it's a really cool thing to do.
The history is, the more you learn about the history of Christianity and Christendom, the harder it gets to accept in the form that we understand it in America. But when I teach Bible studies now. That's a thing. I do a bi-weekly Bible study where
full circle.
Right. Where I tell people as an intro to the study, I'm like, listen, I am not trying to convert you to anything. We're going to approach this from scholarship, and we're going to take in ancient history, anthropology, science, what we know and understand, and then look at this text, because you can't say that the Bible hasn't been influential. It is. It's one of the most impactful books that's ever been published. But when you actually look at Christ's teaching in the scope of what we know about him and what we know about ancient history in the Near East, is that a lot of the basic principles are very similar to what you find in Buddhist and more like philosophical esoteric principles. Love your neighbor. Be kind to those around you. Leave the earth better than what you found it. That you are required for stewardship for what you've been given. All of those themes are essentially the same. And what you start to find when you approach the Bible from scholarship is that these ideals that have been cherry picked out of the Bible, and again, stamped with Jesus, it's not accurate. Like, I just did a study about the Bible and abortion and addressed that the Bible never discusses this. Jesus never talks about it, but also very specifically that ancient Israelites and ancient Hebrews understood life as beginning at first breath. And Exodus is very clear that the life of the fetus is not equivalent to the life of the mother. It's given property value. And then when you look at the New Testament, there was three schools of Greek philosophical thought that had very different views on when ensoulment happens. And that's what they based their belief on. And essentially early Christians believed that ensoulment happened at the quickening. So 20 to 24 weeks when the fetus can move and it's fully formed. And it wasn't until much, much later that abortion was then deemed that life began at conception. That's a fairly new idea. And even in the United States, abortion was legal in the 1800s. It wasn't until the rise of the American Medical Association, when male doctors wanted to exclude and disenfranchise midwives who controlled the medicine around female reproduction, that they began independently writing to states to ban abortion, which they got done. And then those bans were relaxed in the 30s because it was seen as a mercy when families are starving and people can't find work. So, and then it was tightened again when they lost the battle for the segregation of schools and they needed a new voting point for the evangelical base. And so they chose gay people and abortion because racism just wasn't as popular anymore. When Roe was passed, the Southern Baptist Convention issued three church edicts saying we support a woman's right to choose. The historically very conservative Dallas Theological Seminary said, we support a woman's right to choose, that there is no biblical doctrine that overrides a woman's autonomy of her body. And it wasn't until 1978 that Jerry Falwell gave his first anti-abortion speech, because Paul Weyrich, the founder of the Heritage Foundation, said, this is a great tool that we can use to rally the evangelical vote. That happens in the late 70s. They eventually marry the party with religion. And then that's how Reagan enters office. But these were really, it was always just political talking.
I've been wanting to jump in, and I'm like, I know you're getting there. I'm gonna let you finish. I'm gonna let you finish, but I just want to be like, it's fucking Reagan. It's always fucking Reagan.
It's fucking Reagan. And what we see with the big ugly bill right now is just a repackaging of the same Reagan policies, because Reagan was the first huge upward transfer of wealth, and they're just repeating it. But all of these biblical things you look, and even the biblical argument about the LGBTQ community, I'm like, this is such a intentional ignoring of ancient culture and ancient understanding of sexuality. It's also cherry picking, because conveniently you're not talking about adultery, which is mentioned way more in the Bible. But it's there has to be an other that you can scapegoat. When gay marriage was passed and the sky didn't fall, they had to find a new target, and so they picked trans people. And so it's just, so now I've just been working in this space of where I'm like, none of this is true. None of it is. And it's so the Bible studies are really from this scholarship perspective to hopefully help heal some religious trauma, but also for Christians who are like, I honor Christ and I want to treat my neighbor with love and I want to make the world better. It kind of it's relieving some of that church guilt that I'm like, no, this is propaganda that's been used to control and manipulate you.
Wow, Jordan, I think she might know more about how religion affects politics. And I think that knowledge body might be more than all that we know about politics. It feels like.
Yeah, it's certainly. She got on that, and I knew exactly where your story was going, and I was like, oh, I can jump in and add something here. And like, nope, you just flowed right into that. I'm like, oh, I can jump in and add something here.
I have a very specific set of skills.
Yeah, no doubt.
So a little bit back to you as a person before we kind of move on to big picture stuff. You said you were close to your dad. Obviously, you view, like, looking back and you see that relationship with him as conditional. Love was conditional. Obviously, it became easier for you to move into who you were supposed to be once you didn't have to worry about his judgment or his feelings about, becoming a witch or whatever he would think you are today.
Burn the witch, as the Lord hath ordained.
And you said your mom left, which I can't imagine. It sounds like your father was a very respectful person to women. But
he was a little rough.
So can you walk us through? And obviously, you don't have to go through anything that you view too personal or private. But like, why and how did your mom leave? How did your very evangelical family reconcile that? How do you view your relationship with your dad today, now looking back and kind of having a 30,000-foot picture of what your upbringing was? I'm curious about all that. 'Cause I know that's a lot of things that people struggle with when they're going through their own deconstruction and trying to become their own person under the shadow of what they were brought up in with their family. And that's one of the hardest things is If
Mm-hmm.
I make these decisions or hold these beliefs publicly, I'll be alienated from my family, and that's hard to do even when it's toxic. Yeah, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so again, growing up, I was always daddy's girl, even when I was very, very little. And like my love of music comes from my father. He was a musician, and that's really where it comes from. But with my mom leaving, when I remember coming home from school, and my dad was crying on the couch, and I'd never seen him cry. And I go up to him and I'm like, Daddy, what's wrong? And he says, well, your mom left. And I had no idea what that meant. Like I was 6. And I remember again, Jesus girl, I like put my hands on my father and said, Daddy, let me pray for you. And I did. And so eventually what came out was that she left with actually a hired hand that worked for my dad, who was also married to another woman. And the divorce took 2 years. And my dad in a rare move filed for custody, which most people don't know that when men do file for custody, they typically win, even if there's a history of neglect or abuse. It's just that typically they don't file. My dad filed, got all 6 of us kids. And the way that the divorce decree was written, if you were under 13, you had to stay with dad. You didn't have a choice. Once you were 13, you could make a decision what parent you wanted to live with. But my dad weaponized Christianity, and he was very, like, he would talk all the time about the adulteress, and that, like, if you spoke to her, you were accepting her lifestyle. So I never got my mother's side of the story. I saw her once from the time I was 6 until I showed up on her doorstep when I was 18, because I was not allowed to speak to her. I would be cut off from my father if I chose to speak to my mother. And at the time growing up, I was like, oh, well, we're just doing the Christian thing. We're standing up for what's right. And I demonized her. I hated her in high school. And it wasn't until I got older. I graduated high school when I was 16. I went to college out east. And it wasn't until a couple years being away from the family that I realized, I'm like, I really want to talk to her. And I told my dad I was going to do it, and he accepted it. And I went and spoke to her. And obviously, as I grow up, I start to see my dad's misogyny. And I start to see the misogyny that's ingrained in the church, and the patriarchal control, the gender norms, and the fact that the church as we understand it now cannot exist without the subservience and free labor of women. It can't. It will collapse. If women decide that they're not, that's why there's so much outrage about women leaving the church, because there is no church bulletin, there is no VBS, there is no Sunday school without women running it. They're the ones running it, and they don't get appreciated for it. But as I got older, I started to see and recognize that. And I had a couple, I'm not close to my birth mom, but we're on good terms. And I was able to finally have a couple conversations with her in my late teens and early 20s. And I asked her, I said, why did you not fight for custody? And for her, it boiled down to, she was like, I couldn't afford to feed you, and he could. And I couldn't stay. And I was like, you know what? I understand the humanity in that. I understand. I can look back honestly and I still deeply love my father, and I am who I am because of my father. And I understand that he did the best he could with the indoctrination he grew up with. And the desire that he had, he worked his whole life to please his father with this conditional love cycle, and he passed it on to his kids. And I can look back on him now and understood that he had clinical depression and possibly bipolar disorder. And we lived in a family, you didn't go to therapy, you prayed it away. And so I went through a period of time during my deconstruction where I really hated my dad. I was really upset. I was upset about the lies, about being misled, about being groomed into this situation that I didn't want to be in. And back to my ex-fiance, I lost my virginity in my 20s to my ex-fiance a couple months before we were supposed to elope. And I was devastated over it. I was heartbroken. I told my dad about it because it was like a coercive situation. I was kind of put in a position of, you're either going to do this or the relationship's going to fall apart thing. And I had never been in a real relationship before. I didn't know. I call my dad crying the next day because I'm devastated, because I've been told my whole life that my whole value of as a woman is being a virgin for my husband, you know, whatever. Even though I planned to marry this man, my dad screamed at me and then hung up. And it was so, not only had I just gone through this coercive, really terrible first experience, but now my father's shaming me as the only culprit in this situation. I didn't have sex for another 2.5 years. I was so terrified and I was so hurt by it. And that damaged my ability to be in relationships for a long time. Plus, like, that relationship ended in the most comically catastrophic way possible. But I had this
Well,
rage.
you can't stop there and move
Okay,
on from
okay,
that
so-
statement. All right, like
Okay. So 2 days after I lose my virginity to my then fiance, I get up in the middle of the night and I have this urge to check the phone bill. I have never checked the phone bill before or since. But I get on the phone bill and I start seeing all these calls to Hawaii. And I remembered that he had a military buddy who was a woman who was living in Hawaii. And I'm like, huh, that's interesting. So I call her the next day. Hi, I'm so-and-so's fiance. She bursts into tears. And she's like, oh my God, I've been dating him. I just flew to the States to come see him. I just got home. And then this bunny trail leads me to 5 women that he was seeing behind my back. One of them was a dancer from a nearby town who reached out to me, and she sent me nude photos of him. She had proof that stuff was going on. And she confronted him. She's like, I am so sorry. I didn't know he was seeing anyone. I deeply apologize. And and she said, I confronted him. And I was like, well, what did he say? He told her, don't worry about it. She's in love with me and she'll believe anything I tell her. And that wasn't the worst part. He had stolen my identity and he put $65,000 of debt in my name. The business we had started together was completely in my name. 6 different credit cards. He bought a car in my name, and I was homeless for 10 months as a result of it and had to file for bankruptcy at 23.
Wow.
And so
yeah, not
pretty
super comical.
catastrophic.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
no.
think it's comical now. It wasn't comical at the time.
Sure, sure.
But I was living illegally in a warehouse. And this is actually, again, one of those moments that I'm super thankful for because it was a turning point. I'm living illegally in this warehouse. I'm sitting on this twin mattress on the floor, and I'm watching this daddy long-legged spider crawl across the floor. And I'm like, Mont, you have done everything right. You have done everything they've told you. You've dressed the way that they want you to dress. You have said the things. You have memorized the scripture. You found the man. You stayed pure. You did all these things. What do you actually want? And I wanted the same thing that I had wanted since I was 5, was that I wanted to sing and write books and teach. And I called my dad and I said, Dad, I need to borrow $1,000. I'm moving to New York City. And he's like, I'm sorry, you're doing what? And I was like, I'm moving to New York. I'm starting over. I told him what had happened. And I took care of the business, shut everything down, packed up my clothes. I drove myself to New York City in a U-Haul. My first time driving in New York City was a U-Haul truck. And I rebuilt my life. And within a year, I had built a 6-figure personal training business. I had filed for bankruptcy during that time to get rid of the debt that he had put on me. And so I say comically now because it's one of those things where it's like, you can't make that story up. It's like, that has to be real because that's some shit.
It does sound like the beginning of a romantic comedy, like he's dating the wrong guy, and he's dating literally 5 other people, and then but there's no meet cute in the middle of it where you found the love of your life. There's no Matthew McConaughey that swoops in last minute.
Where is Matthew McConaughey without his shirt on? I need my Matthew McConaughey. But New York, that's why a lot of times if people ask me where home is, I say New York City. Because New York is where I found myself and I found art. And I had been a published poet in high school and I reconnected with those things. And then in 2016, so 2 years later after all that happened, my uncle died in June, my dad died in July, and my grandmother and a close friend died on the same day in August. And it was this huge, life-shattering kind of period of years that I'm now super thankful for because it put me in this place of my world had collapsed. And so in order to rebuild that world, I had to build it piece by piece. And it forced me to evaluate every single thing that I've believed about myself, about the world. And it was a huge turning point for me that I could not be more thankful for how I grew up, even with my dad's faults and failings, how my fiance and everything ended up, because I don't know that I would have had the courage to branch out the way that I could have if that hadn't happened to me. And working through my anger towards my father back to my relationship with my dad, I got to this amazing place a couple years ago. And part of it was, and I will say this publicly, I was working with plant medicine, psilocybin. And I just had this moment of compassion for my father. Seeing understanding now that I have the verbiage for mental health disorders, understanding how much he was struggling, understanding how his whole life he just wanted his dad to be proud of him. And my grandfather was not kind to him. and seeing my dad's actions as fear and a lack of understanding, and this beautiful humanness of doing the best he could with what he had and what he understood, and it just not being correct. And so now I can now look back, like I have so much love and compassion for my dad, and I still deeply appreciate the things that he gave me, because had he not set me on that course, I wouldn't be here now. So I definitely had a period of time where I really resented my father, but now it's much more love and compassion. And I'm so thankful that I have the opportunity to openly talk about mental health and to talk about these things. And I've been able to heal from that love is conditional construct, and also know that my dad deeply loved me and was proud of me. Like the last conversation I had with my dad, I had a conversation with my dad the day he died, and he had butt dialed me on accident. I was in a boxing class. I come out, I'm sweaty. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, oh, I didn't mean to, sorry. And I remember he was so joyful that day, and he was so happy. And he was like, I just want you to know, I had just I was getting ready to release my first EP, and I was sending my dad my songs. He was like, I can't believe you wrote this. And he said, I want you to know that I am so unbelievably proud of you. I have never seen anyone pursue their dreams with the passion that you have. And I wish I had had the courage to do the same. And the last thing he said to me was, I love you. And then 6 hours later, I got the phone call that he had had an accident and died. And so it's this beautiful kind of juxtaposition. I see my dad's life as kind of this representation of what it means to be human. And that I can look at him with compassion and forgiveness, and also with so much love and appreciation, because I mean, and if you see a picture, I look just like my dad. Like I am my father's daughter, and I still have so much thankfulness and appreciation for him.
I mean, that is truly beautiful, and I guess that's definitely not the story I was expecting. Did you have something, Taylor?
No, I just, yeah, I guess I would say it sounds like you were very lucky to have a father who, while still believed all those things with the church and religion that he did, that he was able to, I don't want to say put it to the side for you as a person, but to some extent, just to say, to still love you for being you and not being part of the church. Whereas I know a lot of people are not that lucky, that the moment that you break with that.
I hadn't deconstructed as far as I have now. Like I wasn't openly
Sure.
like out of the church yet, but I will say my dad had started to soften and he did not like Trump. He was very much, because my dad had a hard line about adultery because of his own experience, but he did not compromise that for men or women. And so he
Sure.
we never really got to have that conversation because he passed away before, because when Trump showed up was when I was like, I have to talk to dad. That I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-LGBT, I don't believe in Christian nationalism, I don't believe these, and I knew I needed to sit down and have this full conversation with him, the consequences be damned, and he passed away the week after I had made the decision to have a talk with him.
Sure.
So
I'm curious, because we talked about this a little bit when I was on your podcast, where I've for the most part given up on trying to save these people, so to speak, educate them out of their indoctrination, because so much of the ignorance is so painfully willful at this point from my perspective. Like, you have access to a worldwide web of information in your pocket at any given time, and you choose to come up with a narrative and then find anything that will confirm that preconceived bias. And so, as we were talking about before, my philosophy is shaming them into shutting the fuck up and hoping that making an example out of them while providing some educational information will help other people who aren't as far gone as them, maybe find that deconstruction, or not fall into the propaganda and the lies of, the welfare queens and the post-birth abortions and all this ridiculous stuff that doesn't actually exist. And it's easier for me to not have empathy for those people because I didn't grow up in a strict religious household like that, where I had somebody super close to me in that situation. And so I guess on your human side, I know you said you struggled a little bit, like, coming to that point, because obviously now you get online and make men cry for fun. and over the same kind of stuff. And I'm curious as to like how you feel with that. Do you reconcile it differently because it was your father specifically? Do you feel that same type of empathy for all of these people, as hurtful, harmful, and flawed and toxic as they are to society at the moment? Like, how's that working for you?
I think it's a little bit of both. So what I tell my followers all the time is I'm like, have the hard conversations. Talk to your conservative parents, talk to your conservative siblings, provided they are not openly hateful and violent. Because you cannot get anywhere with people that are just screaming at the top of their lungs. They don't care what the truth is. It's all confirmation bias. Like, you're not going to get anywhere. Those are the people in the comments that I will get online, and I will eviscerate you, and you will not sleep tonight. Like, fuck you, disrespectfully. But I also, because I come from this background, I recognize that so many people, and I don't think as much now, I think that this debacle with the Epstein list has really created a change in temperature where we're going to see these two groups separate. So you've got your hateful people who they're not going to deviate from Trump no matter what. And they're not worth having conversation with, because if pedophilia is not a deal breaker for you, then there's no conversation to be had. But there are this group of people, and it's so hard to fathom when you didn't grow up in a cult. When you grow up in a cult and all of your information is policed, and everything that you've been fed from the time that you can understand language is this one thing, and you have been raised, like, they raise you with militant language, onward Christian soldiers. They raise you with war. You know, I was living in Wyoming when Columbine happened, and the Cassie Bernal story, which turned out not to be true at all. And so they weaponize this, and they have you on the defense all the time. And it's this infusion of, you know, America is this Christian nation, which it's not. We're a nation that was supposed to be founded on religious liberty. And they don't teach you the history of racism and systemic injustice, and even the racism within the church. Like, the black church exists because of sins the white church has not repented for. And when you grow up in this paradigm where you are not allowed access to any other kind of information, it is so easy to fall prey to these ideologies. And it is so easy to be stuck until something gobsmacks you in the face and you see it for what it is. So I think that Epstein is going to be that moment for a lot of people, because a lot of these people, and it's hard to see because you look at them and you want to smack them and shake them, be like, you are such a fucking idiot. It's so easy. But at the same time, many of them believe that they are fighting a war for God, literally. They believe they're doing the right thing. They believe that the LGBTQ community is grooming children. They believe in litter boxes, like whatever it is. This has been inflammatory language that's been used since mail-in voter registrations that were, or not voter registrations, but voting campaigns that were started by the far right in the 70s. Because the more emotional and hateful you can get people, the more likely they are to vote. So many of these people truly believe, as disillusioned as it is from our perspective, that they're doing the right thing. Yeah. And when you have been raised in that doctrine, it is very hard to get out, because not only do you have the information, the limited information, and that's why the far right demonizes education, not just because it expands your worldview, but because women are excelling in it, but also it allows for this, the dogma gets driven in and driven in and driven in and driven in until you think that no other reality exists. If you lie to someone often enough, they begin to believe it. And so for many of them, it takes a severe break to veer from that worldview, which I think the Epstein files is going to be a major one for a lot of people, which I'm actually really thankful for, because it exposes this movement for what it is and what it's always been, which is white supremacy that put on a red hat instead of a white hood.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's a good answer. Back to the root of the question is, you don't view all of these people, like, you feel like you can kind of tell the difference between the people who are indoctrinated into this hate and people who really live this hate. And
yeah, I think the difference is people who are willing to have a conversation versus a screaming match. Even if they don't walk away agreeing with you, they're willing to have that conversation. Because, I mean, I have people that come onto my Patreon and onto my Instagram all the time that are messaging me, different age groups, 40s, 50s, 60s, even a woman in her 80s who have come to me and said, I have been a conservative Christian my entire life. I see it now. The blinders are off. How do I learn? Where do I start? And these are people that have spent their whole life in this system. And so when someone is willing to have the conversation and they're willing, at least willing to be there, I see it as the difference. Like a lot of people ask me, they're like, would you debate Charlie Kirk? And I'm like, no, because Charlie Kirk is not interested in the truth. He's interested in spectacle. I would go on Joe Rogan. I do not like Joe Rogan, and I don't agree with him on most things. But Joe Rogan has enough integrity that he's willing to have a conversation with people of different opinions. And he's also someone who has and is willing to say, you know what, that's a good point. You know what, I think I was wrong on that. Do I think I'm going to change Joe Rogan's mind on these major issues? No. But it allows for the conversation, and I think that's the difference. When you have someone who's only interested in dogma and spectacle, it's not worth your time. It's not to say that they can't walk away someday. It may hit them personally enough eventually, but they're not ready to have the conversation. But there are people who are ready to have those conversations, because especially growing up in the church, you have these moments where you see things where you're like, that doesn't seem right. And as a woman, I realized that my deconstruction started when I was 9. I remember being told as a 9-year-old was the first time that I was kind of physically policed. I was wearing a sleeveless shirt, and I was told that I was sexualizing my body and causing men to stumble. Now, there was no accountability for the grown men who were apparently attracted to a 9-year-old. But when I was having, this was in Sunday school, and when I was looking at the teacher, and I remember raising my hand and asking her, and I'm like, if men are supposed to be leaders, why shouldn't we expect them to lead themselves? And I was asked to leave.
You were asked to leave?
I was asked to leave the Sunday school. I was not allowed to come into her class anymore. And then
that
when
sounds
I was
about
sitting,
right for Sunday school.
Right?
Yeah, ask too many questions or ask the wrong question and you're out.
And then I sit in church, and I remember hearing my first sermon on wifely subjugation, right? I've never heard a sermon my entire life about consent, rape, domestic violence, ever, but I've heard so many sermons on women submit to your husbands and gossip. And I remember the same thing. It was the same year. I was 9. And I remember hearing this, and in my head, I was like, I'm not going to submit to someone just because they're a man. And I didn't know how to articulate that as a kid, but when you grow up in that structure, they tell you you're inherently sinful, you're inherently broken. Don't trust your own mind. Don't trust your own questions. If you question, you're questioning God, and your mind is going to lead you to sin and to the devil. So you grow up from childhood inherently distrusting your own brain, your own doubt, your own instinct, and you're taught that questions are evil. It's a really good way to program a mass of people who just fall in line. And so that's why it's so hard to get them out.
And that's sort of the issue that I've had with Christianity in particular, is it seems like it's best at controlling people. And like the whole, eat from the fruit of the knowledge and the mind tree, and that's your path to sin. So if you're questioning and you're trying to learn more things and gather perspectives, you're doing the devil's work. And that kind of built-in doctrine level control over, or attempted control over its people, seems to me just to be it defeats the purpose of having a religion at that point. And so, and the fact that it's been so prolific and has worked so well in just doing a million atrocities, and all in the name of the Lord, and just it never made sense to me in that way.
Yeah, and it really is. Yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, it makes perfect sense, because it was always designed to be a structure of power for the elite. And you think back to a time when religion was really, being built and taking off. Most people weren't literate; they couldn't read it for themselves. And if you tell them, learning to read and learning all of these things is bad, and that's going to lead you to sin, then you can't read this, and then you have to trust the people in power that they are disseminating this information to you correctly. And if you don't trust them and you go against what they say, you're going to go to hell and suffer for all eternity. And that's a pretty big motivator to just listen and fall in line, no matter how bad it seems. I am curious, because you said, the sleeveless shirt was the beginning of your deconstruction, and obviously your style has gone far from that now. Fully really embraced the liberal, or the stereotype of what conservatives think, a liberal woman is, with the septum piercing and the multicolored hair and
which
the tattoos.
I got my septum piercing in my 30s. So this was not This was a new edition.
Yeah, you definitely sound exactly like what I would picture a liberal woman described like on, Jesse Waters' Fox and Friends or
Yeah,
whatever the fuck she's
happily.
hosting now.
If I had known that the septum piercing would be such a good filter for people who are pieces of shit, I would have gotten it sooner.
Well, and so
Right.
that's my question, is because you've done this, and obviously they tried to like use that sort of explanation to try to make it sound like liberal or leftist women are ugly and unattractive, and obviously the pictures that they use or try to form aren't. But you've done it in and not trying to be disrespectful, very hot way, and you know that they are just out there like hate baiting to you in like despise your guts, but on their Instagram, just wearing out their
Oh,
arms.
listen, I know what their OnlyFans look like. I'm like, this is a whole subgenre, you guys. I know what you're doing, and also, and we see all the time, as far as like even like child sex crimes and stuff, it's always a freaking pastor or a youth pastor. Like these are like Christians want to paint this picture of purity while being the furthest thing from it. But it's what I realized was this again, because it was a journey, my fashion, tattoos, the piercings, and it was really about claiming my own expression. Because again, specifically for women in the church, these standards, and I recorded a podcast today for my podcast about the witch trials, and that it was really about policing women's wealth, their knowledge, their sexuality, and their role in spiritual office, because women used to hold spiritual office in pre-Christian pagan cultures and in 1st and 2nd century Christianity. Women were deacons, they were leaders of churches, they were apostles, and we've, Christians have, like, male patriarchy Christians have, like, kind of erased that history. But it's really about the reason that it offends them so much is because I do it as my expression of feminine, not this skinny white blonde, their preference. When I'm doing it for my preference and not theirs, that's what they find so offensive. It's the combination of that and being a person who is self-aware, confident, who loves and expresses themselves, make people who are closeted in any way, in any form of expression, really uncomfortable. And I quite frankly love it. Like the most common insults I get the nose ring comment, obviously. I get called a tranny a lot. And I'm like, that's how you tell me. First of all, I can tell you're short because I'm 5'10". That's what they'll go, though. She looks like a tranny. And I'm like, listen, first of all, trans women are way hotter than I am, and I want makeup tools from them. But also, you just told me that I won the argument. Because if the only thing that you have is to attack my appearance, but you can't articulate your position, you have already lost. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you boosting me in the algorithm.
Also, they just told you what their browser history is full of as well.
100%.
So.
100%. 100%. I'm like, I know what you're looking for.
So did the attitude and the confidence come with deconstruction, or was that always there? Because usually if you're brought up kind of that timid, repressed person to go full swing into what you are today, that's a pretty big transition, I would assume.
It's a very, very big. So it was a little bit of both. I was very good growing up at playing the part. Like the sweet, good, conservative Christian girl, quiet, don't rock the boat, don't speak up for yourself, submit to male authority, male headship, do all the things, check all the boxes. I am a goal-oriented girly. I like getting straight A's. I was very good at the performance. But I can look back on my life now and realize that there were pieces of it that were there, because there were these moments I would have of like this defiance, but I would push it down because I'm like, oh, that's sin. That's my pride. I'm defying God, all of these things. And also because my growing up years were very, very violently abusive. My dad was very violently abusive. My stepmom was as well. There was a 2-year period of my life where my younger brother and I were forced to live in a dark basement, and we were not allowed to come upstairs unless we were cleaning the house or leaving the house. So we existed in this, and abuse shapes your view of self and your view of self-worth. So I was in this home where love was very conditional. It was based on what you did right and your performance. And my dad had no issue cutting off his children if they did something he didn't like. And then you couple that with abuse, with these teachings from Christian nationalist version of Christianity. And so when I started to deconstruct, it was really about building a new identity, but also finding out who I was. And it was really a process. And I got to a point where I was like, I will not allow someone to make me feel small because they are insecure. I will not. And as I discovered the world outside of Christian music, Newsboys and DC Talk, and I discovered hip hop and I discovered metal, which is like one of my favorites, to the surprise of no one. But it was this primal expression, and it's honest, and it's just these like deep intrinsic kind of core needs and values that you hear in music were big transformative things for me. And it was just growth. And the more comfortable I got with myself and the more knowledgeable I got and more confident in my beliefs, I can articulate my position. I learn new things every day, and my worldview will shift when new data is apparent to me, but I will be able to articulate exactly to you why I believe what I believe. And so the more confident I got, the more I'm like, And I can spot insecurity in a person a mile away. And I'm like, your desire for control is because of your fear. You will not project that fear onto me. And I can't say that I'm fearless. I have fears. Everyone does. But I am now in a place where I'm like, I know exactly who the fuck I am and what I stand for, and I will not shrink. I spent so much of my life shrinking, and it made me so unhappy and left me empty and penniless and bankrupt and broke, and I will never go back. And that's another reason that fashion is so important to me, because the Christian nationalist church polices women's appearance and their clothing so much. And it's funny because they demonize places like Afghanistan and Iran that are under control of the Taliban, which are theocracies. They're theocracies. And forcing a woman to wear a burqa she doesn't want to wear is the same exact thing they do. It just has a different brand logo.
Yeah.
So that's
why we call them Al Qaeda, you know.
Exactly, it's Al Qaeda. It's amazing. But yeah, so it was a journey. But I think there was always a little bit of it there that I had been taught was somehow evil. But it really was developing into being a person that I wanted to be.
I know Taylor had he's kind of been adding to the thing as we go on, because every time you talk about something, more ideas come up here, and I think we could go all day. But I'm gonna let him go ahead and get into some of the stuff that he'd been writing down here. He wants to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have a super awesome story. Definitely more interesting than I think Jordan and I, if we even pick the best parts out of either one of our stories and combine them into one story, I think you'd still take the cake. I guess I was mostly bringing up just some sort of current event stuff. With I guess I was watching some of your videos and was like, oh, I hadn't heard that they're making a second location down in Florida for some second alligator outreach, and now there's a concern with like hurricane season, and like I don't know where they are exactly. I just assume they're in the middle of Florida, which generally is flooded regardless of any day. But like, have you heard that they're specifically like right where a hurricane would be in full force? And
so the second location that they've proposed is going to be south of Jacksonville, which is, so it's, I mean, anywhere obviously in Florida can be hit by a hurricane, but especially when you're nearer to the coast and in any kind of wet, marshy area, is going to be a problem. And they're taking these funds from emergency responses, it's one of those things, it's a fuck around and find out. It's kind of like what happened in Texas. When you do not fund having emergency responses to extreme weather and you deny that climate change is real, even while we witness it happen in real time, they're going to find out, unfortunately. And what's unfortunate about that, there's on the one hand the idea of like, well, you get what you voted for. But then there's, the little girls in Texas that got swept away because of bad policies.
Yeah.
They're human,
they're still humans, and still not everybody there was a Trump supporter and everything.
And the people who are going to suffer the most are the children and the minorities who didn't have anything to do with this. But so they're talking about a second location and very, very excited about ramping up deportations, to quote DeSantis.
Yeah. Speaking of climate change there too, and the fact that I've come to the conclusion that climate change denier conspiracy theorists are dumber than flat earthers objectively. And this is because like I can understand why somebody would think the world's flat. Like, you walk outside and you look around, and at eye level, it looks kind of flat. Now, obviously, it's pretty stupid in 2025 to, think that there's the edge of the world somewhere. But, like, at least taking in what your eyes can see and your own personal experience and nothing else beyond that, I can at least understand where that comes from. In my life, in my 35 years on this planet, I have seen the climate change. It is different. Like, there is smoke here in Minnesota from Canadian wildfires every summer now. That never was a thing. Not one time growing up do I remember Canadian wildfire smoke. And the summers have gotten hotter. Past 2 years, we've gotten no snow. Minnesota, no snow. It's unheard of, right? And I get so frustrated, and that's why, like, you can see this. Like, if you're just going off of what you are physically experiencing, and you can see this and you're still denying it, you are a dumber conspiracy theorist than even flat earthers. And somebody on Threads, I think the other day, posted some meme. It's like, oh, all this time they were saying that, the ice caps were melting, or Al Gore, or something about climate change, and nothing happened. And I'm like, a hurricane flooded a fucking mountaintop in a state that doesn't even touch the ocean 11 months ago. What the fuck do you mean nothing's happening? How can you see that a hurricane flooded the top of a goddamn mountain and not be like, oh yeah, no, this is not normal? Sorry.
Deny. Well, and what they do, again, so this is all like back to, they start you out, because the only way that you can take Genesis as literal truth, even though Genesis 1 and 2 are not only poetic myths that are very common for literature at the time, but they contradict each other. The order of creation is different from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But if you,
I had that conversation too just recently. Guys, like, if you can point out a single contradiction in the Bible, I will give up Christianity right now, and I would order of Genesis right there.
Well, here you go.
Yeah, and he's like, no, that's not a contradiction. That's just one's the overview and one's specifics, and you just don't understand context. And I'm like, my God, dude. Okay.
But the only way that you can buy Genesis as like literal fact, which is what this whole oppression of women is based on, right? Like, Eve sinned first, even though how can it be a sin if she didn't actually know what evil was yet? Different story. But in order to do that, you have to demonize science from the get-go. So science has to be a foundational enemy from the time you're very young, and that's what they teach you. And they will science, when they think it proves some form of Christianity, is great. Anytime it contradicts, it's an attack on Christianity. So obviously evolution is this great evil. We used to have to come into church during the weekdays, and we would watch this movie series called Answers in Genesis with Ken Ham, who would teach us how to debate, right? Who would teach us how to debate and justify creationism. And there were all kinds of conspiracy theories around, like, nature, things like, they found the ark, in the Himalayas. No, they didn't. They never found that. Like, just, and any kind of propaganda, they would just take it in. My favorite one was, well, there's two. One was that dinosaur bones were planted by the devil to deceive us, to make us question God.
I mean, that's just fact. Obviously.
Satan is really, they give Satan a lot of power. I got to tell him that. Like, Satan's killing it out here.
God's all powerful, but Satan's out here just fucking mopping the floor with him, it seems like, left and right when we really get down to it.
Yep. And the second one was that scientists were able to drill to the center of the earth and they could hear the screams from hell, and that's how we know it's real.
I mean, in Russia, there's like a hole that's like called the pit to hell, right? I think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And so it's all of that, but they have to demonize science from childhood because it's the way that they justify a literal Genesis account.
My wife and I just found this documentary called, I think it's like Genesis, or Is Genesis History? And it basically trying to just prove all this creationist stuff, that the world was created in 7 days, and all the things that we can verify and see with our own eyes and physically test are just are actually untrue. And we got about halfway through it, and it was a little late, so we were happy to turn it off. But it was just getting, at a certain point, we're like, all right, this was funny, and now we can't just,
like, now I can't handle it.
Every 5 minutes we're pausing, every 2 minutes we're pausing to be like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard somebody say in my life. When you're trying to, and they start with like showing like there's like 8 PhDs on the documentary. It's like, I don't care. And they didn't even say what kind of PhDs they were. We don't know.
Yeah, and they could just
honorary
not be real.
PhDs from Liberty University.
Right.
Even
could
if
be
they
from
are
Trump
true,
University.
Yeah, even if they are true earned PhDs, it doesn't matter.
But, I mean, Jordan Peterson's technically a doctor, right?
Well, yeah, of psychology. Yeah, yeah. Um, well, so another one that just kind of came up, and I saw this on Reddit actually today, where some teachers, they didn't say which school district or where they were teaching, but they are now, within the next couple of weeks, they're actually receiving the posters that are approved to have the Ten Commandments on them, and they have to put those up in their classroom somewhere or be fired. And they have to take down all their LGBTQ or just gender material, and they can no longer sponsor student-led groups that are like GSAs, like gay straight alliances. Like I'm
Yep.
sure we all had those in high school. They were really big. I don't know if they're still big or not, but like I'm sure they are. And so and those schools can no longer have those groups, and now they have to have the Ten Commandments in every single classroom. And yeah, it's just bonkers to me that we've gotten to this point. Even in the red states, like it feels like this is no longer just business as usual. When it comes to Republicans and Democrats and this back and forth, they are taking it once again to the extreme, and it is pushing us to a point where it doesn't feel like we're going to be the same country we were 10 years ago in the next 10 years. It seems like it's going to be a completely different place.
And they're no longer, and it's never been business as usual.
Sure.
We're just in a position where they've dropped pretense, because this is all based on the Seven Mountains Mandate, where Christian dominionists and Christian nationalists believe that Christians should control and dominate every sphere of culture, including government, because that's what's going to issue in the return of Christ. It's also this kind of harebrained allegiance to anything that Israel does, is because they believe Israel plays a key role in the return of Christ, even though many of them are also deeply anti-Semitic. That's why there's that weird juxtaposition of like white supremacy and anti-Semitism, but they support Israel no matter what. It's really related to this post-millennial belief about the return of Christ. And so there's so many levels to it, but part of it is that they only understand faith as a form of force, because this was never about faith. It was never about Christ. It's about control, and it's about subjugating other. But it's also because performance negates their responsibility for action. They can walk around and talk about, we want the Bible, we want the Ten Commandments in schools, which the kids aren't going to read. They don't care. You know what I mean? And I would love for an atheistic teacher to teach the Bible in class as a form of literature and deconstruct it, because that's what they'll do. But they have all these things because they can ride on the self-righteousness of, well, I voted to put the Bible in schools, but they do not have to go out and help their neighbor, because their neighbor is other. I don't have to go help the homeless.
Well,
I don't
and
have
just
to be kind to this person, because it's all performance. It's the same thing. Again, we see, around the issues of racial injustice, is that as specifically white evangelical Christians, because they're the most culpable. You're going to church and you're doing all these things. And we go to church every Sunday and we vote Republican and we do this, but you have no interest, no stake in social justice within your neighborhood. And the performance in their mind allows them to negate their responsibility. And also this idea about the rapture and heaven and hell, this focus on the next life. Again, it kind of absolves me of my responsibility to be good in this one. And there's a lot of indications that, especially in the New Testament, that Jesus and Paul understood kingdom of heaven and hell, because the lake of burning fire, hell, is not an actual biblical doctrine. But this idea of that was that the kingdom of heaven is now. You reap what you sow, and your actions will determine, is this heaven or is this hell now? But by being involved in performance faith, and by being involved in this ideology around the rapture and around what happens after this life, negates them of their responsibility to be good now and to fight for justice now and to follow the teachings of Christ now, which they're not interested in. They're interested in the power and the prestige that comes with it.
Well, and just back to the beginning, what we were talking about with like abortion and now trans people and gay people, and when they always pick one of these hills to die on, it's not that they. I'm convinced that most of the people, especially the people voting on this stuff, don't actually care about anything. They don't care if the Bible's in school or the Ten Commandments are on the wall, or if gay people are married, or if trans people play sports or whatever it is. It's this is the one thing that I can sell to people with the IQ of the temperature of my refrigerator to get out and vote on, where I'm doing all of this stuff that is completely fucking them in the ass, and they're just not going to pay attention to it because, oh, Bible's in school now, and I'm getting to project my superiority on somebody else, because that's what all of this has been. You know, it was you convince the lowest white man that he's better than the highest black man, and he will, you know, vote against his self-interest every time. And that's all this is across the board. And as long as you give them that one shiny object that makes them feel slightly superior to somebody else, and that they're getting justification from their leadership on that, they can go and they can vote to take away your Medicaid and give that to themselves, because that's really what they care about, is the money and the power that comes with the ability to not have you paying attention to all of that stuff that they're doing behind the scenes, or not care. And so that's really what I think it comes down to, is it's not specifically that they give a shit whether religion is in school or not. It's just a tool.
It's outrage. Hate is a much more powerful motivator for action than love is, and they've known that for a long time. Hate is powerful when it comes to action. Love and hope have more enduring power, but hate is more powerful for immediate action. And when they started, after the Watergate scandal and kind of the new right was born, when they started these mailing lists where they would mail conservative voters and enrage them and get them to support these conservative candidates, for every $250 that they would bring in, only $11 actually went to the candidates. It's been a money scheme from the beginning, and it's about outrage. It's about telling people things that aren't true. And if they get called on it, they used to like quietly apologize, but still not retract it. And now they just openly lie and double down. But it's about, if I can make you hate someone, if I can give you someone to blame. And again, so I just did a podcast on the witch trials. And a lot of that was in response to the Black Plague. A third of the population is dying. It seems like this divine curse because they had a limited understanding of, you know, disease. And so what do? You scapegoat somebody. It's got to be the women. It's got to be the witches, and that just changes with the culture. But it's really about making hate. Hate is actionable, and it invigorates voters.
Especially, it's easy. It's a lot harder to get somebody to have action, even angry action or something, on complex topics. Like,
yes,
and
nuance
that's the problem.
complicates things.
We live in a very gray world, and to understand why, you know, a big beautiful bill, quote unquote, is bad, and how that's going to negatively impact your life, you have to understand a lot of layers and a lot of how policy affects that. To understand, you know, how immigrants are actually a positive for our society and our community, and necessary. You have to understand how the entire economic system works, how societal structures work, and poverty works. Exactly. You have to understand all of these things, and it's way easier to be like, well, I'm poor, and it's not my fault I'm poor, because nothing can be my fault.
Yep.
It's
got to be this other guy,
that person's fault. And as long as you can sell that to them, it's way easier than selling, because that's what's frustrating, is we're coming out here and trying to message an accurate and truthful thing to be. There's plenty to be angry about. We have plenty of people to hate and good reasons to hate them, but you have to understand a lot of moderately complex pieces of history and policy and society to understand why we hate them. They're not billionaires because they worked hard, but that's the simple thing. It's like, I'm rich because I did good. These people are poor because they're bad and stealing your job, and that's why you're poor. So don't blame me, blame them for ruining society. And that's a much easier concept to grasp and get angry at than it is to, you know, understand all of these big.
Well, and that's the ideology that's used. It's a political application of prosperity gospel. So if you know, prosperity gospel teaches that, well, if you give your money to me, you do the right things, you pray the right way, God's going to bless you with wealth and success and abundance. So they get to rally service from you, money from you, in exchange for this promise of success. But then when the success doesn't come, because that's not how it works, they get to say, well, there must be unconfessed sin in your life. What are you doing? You're not working hard enough. It's just a political application of that ideology, because it creates a false promise that then you get to blame the person that you made the promise to when it doesn't get fulfilled. Because this whole idea of, well, if you just work harder, you could be a billionaire. It's hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you don't have boots. And so it's a leapfrog over all these questions, but it's a political application of prosperity gospel.
Mm-hmm. Except they take it one step further, because with prosperity gospel, you are taking that blame yourself. With this, they are giving you a scapegoat to blame somebody else. Like every single time, you don't have to take any of that responsibility. They're even and these people do have some responsibility. A lot of these people are poor because they voted for these policies and these rich people to exploit them. Now, it's not their fault directly that they're poor. This capitalist system crushes all of us. But they are the ones who are sitting there and carrying the water for that system that is, burdening them. And so in that situation, they actually hold more responsibility, in my opinion, than the people who are being exploited by prosperity gospel and taking less of that responsibility.
Well, and it also it's this idea of, and this is how they've been able to get white women especially to oppose their own self-interest historically, is that it's the idea of proximity to power. If you'll join me in demonizing other, it's going to elevate your status. And it's this idea of being the master's favorite dog still means you're a dog. But when you can give people this idea that you're going to at least get crumbs from the table, it's better than not being at the table at all. You can get people to fall into alliance with this other, when it's always been top versus bottom. And the left versus right rhetoric is just extremely helpful to keep us from approaching that real issue.
Yep, ain't no war but class war, baby.
Yep.
So is there? I guess leading into that a little bit, is there a? I mean, I know there's no silver bullet, right, to breaking through and kind of reaching these people, other than, from what I can tell, is if there is somebody who's willing to have a conversation and understands, the value of a human being, then you can sometimes break in and help those people see just a little bit and sort of break out of that. But for not quite like full like MAGA and just sort of, I don't know, like moderate Republicans, if that's even a thing still.
Are you talking about your dad, Taylor?
He's my archetype in my mind, but not specifically. Just like what is the key to this at all related to Christianity? And if it is, what would be the one thing you would point to?
Well, I think the one thing is for especially Democratic leaders, I think that Andy Beshear does a great job of this, and James Tallarico. They're both believers who
James
know
Tallarico is a fucking rock star.
He's a beast.
Like,
I love him.
That man, they need to put him on the national stage.
I have followed him for forever.
I think I just saw him like a week ago, and that's the first time I've ever heard of him.
I've been following him for like over a year and a half. Absolutely love him. I'm like, I want to get you on the podcast.
I'm trying to get him on the podcast. People start tagging him because he I did a video about him, a political figure video, and then he followed me back after that, and I wrote him, and I never got a response, and I don't know, he's probably got people, it was probably his people following me. I have no idea, but I've been trying to get him on the podcast, so if you're watching, listening to this, just start harassing him until he, acknowledges my existence.
Until he looks at me. I also need to do that. But like one of the things, so I had dinner with Marianne Williamson in April, and she was asking me about the Democratic Party, and I said, listen, I was like, we shouldn't have to have this political discourse around Christianity, but we're in a position where we do. And I was like, every single Democratic candidate who wants a chance at rooting this out of their district or their state, wherever they are, has to understand the core tenets of Christian nationalism and Christian fundamentalism. And that's why Andy Beshear and James Tallarico are so successful, because they not only have a working understanding of what the Bible actually teaches, but they know what these arguments are. So they don't get sent into these tailspins in nonsense because they're grounded in what I tell people all the time is, I'm like, if you want to have these conversations and be able to dismantle it, you have to understand what the conversation is. Because if you can't get over the hurdle of, well, the Bible says, you're not going to get to the next topic or to the core issue, because that's their first barrier of entry. Shouldn't be like that. Absolutely shouldn't be like that, because when you enforce your religion on others, you violate their religious liberty. But that's the position we're in. And so I told Marianne at that time, I was like, every single serious Democratic nominee needs to sit down with a former Christian nationalist and have this conversation.
Also, just in that sense, it's anti-Christian to force your religious views on other people, because the whole tenet of being a Christian is that you willingly accept that and you live that life of your own free will. If you're not doing that, then you're not being a Christian, right?
But
So
you're
like
also supposed to recruit. You're also supposed to recruit and
right,
grow,
but
right?
this is the point of legislating it, right? Like if you make something illegal based on your religion, based on your Christian beliefs, and so people aren't doing it simply because it's illegal, they're not doing it of their own free will because they value those Christian values, and therefore that has taken any of the value out of that Christian lifestyle. I mean, it completely invalidates the whole premise in my perspective.
Yeah, well, and
Correct me
also
if
if
I'm
you're
wrong,
looking
but
specifically at the life of Christ, with Christ it was always an invitation. It was never about force. It was just this offering. But again, none of this is about Christ. This is why Christian nationalists love Old Testament God, and they do think that Jesus is woke. Like Jesus is a brown immigrant, and early Christians were socialist communities. They don't want to engage with that. That's the reality of it. But the reason they like Old Testament God is it's black and white and divine judgment. And as long as it's God ordering it, genocide is fine. Raping prisoners of war is fine. Multiple wives is fine. They like Old Testament God for that reason, is because the reality of it is that none of this is about Christ, and it never has been. That's been their excuse. It's claiming this moral high ground for an evil ideology. It's again, the root is always the love of money is the root of all evil. Like it has always been about ultimately that money. And one of the best ways to control people historically is to make your word be God's word. This isn't what I'm saying. This is how God says it should be. Is a powerful way to control people because of people's inherent fear of death. Because we don't know what happens to us after we die. And if you can capitalize on that fear and you can make it God's will, not your will, oh, it's so powerful. It's such a powerful manipulator for cultures across the board. It's the same reason that Christianity became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire. It was about controlling this sect, making it into a series of doctrine that aligned with Roman values and Constantine's values, and then was able to be used to subjugate the rest of the world in the name of God.
So what I'm hearing is that we have to somehow dispel the fear that, the existential fear is difficult to expel, but we have to sort of send a message or provide a message that hopefully dissuades some people from being so fearful of just being, I don't know, poor or homeless or of death, I guess, and then give some sort of vision, I guess.
Well, and I think the biggest part is because everybody's fear is different. It's a matter of knowing that it's there, knowing that their fear is there, knowing why this is such a powerful tool in people's lives. When you know that and you're coming into the conversation knowing, okay, I know that many of you have been indoctrinated by this since you were 3. I know that you have these fears. I know that you believe you're doing God's will. If I come into that conversation and I understand that baseline, it changes how I lead the conversation. And part of the reason I think that my platform has been so helpful to both Christians, deconstructing Christians, and even people who are leaving MAGA and now following me and attending my studies is because I knew that those fears were there. And I also know all of these Christian nationalist arguments. And I know them so well, I bend them forwards, backwards, throw them out the window. I can get over that hurdle into that core conversation because you're not blocking me from entry with the Bible says, because I'm going to be like, oh, does it? Because I know it better than you, and I've read it more often than you. And I think that's the big hurdle with a lot of people in this conversation is they've been raised in this weaponized idea of it's Christians versus everyone else, and that they deliberately make that entry, well, the Bible says. Because if you don't know the Bible and you don't know these core fundamental Christian teachings like the rapture and 7 Mountains Mandate and all of these things, you're not going to be able to get past their delusion and their illusion to be able to get to the conversation in the first place. And you can see that in the debates with like the Charlie Kirks and the people like that, is they're throwing out this random Christian nationalist speak, rarely getting to the actual conversation because the barrier to entry is, well, I'm a Christian and the Bible says. No, it doesn't. And again, that's why I think that Andy Brashear and like James Tallarico are so effective, is because James Tallarico is like a pastor and he's in theology. Like he's going to skate circles around you. And that is so powerful right now.
Yeah, no, he does.
So when
And
can
I
we expect your announcement then, Senator for Tennessee? You know,
I've been looking at Andy Ogle's seat, and both Andy Ogles and Marsha Blackburn, and being like, man, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for
yeah,
you.
I'll tell you what,
Um,
you would make a much better Marsha Blackburn, like
it's definitely in my goal book of I do plan on running in and participating for office, specifically because I know I can lend to this conversation. And because, I think that the greatest threat to America at this point is Christian nationalism.
I I mean I it's hard to argue with that. Even United States intelligence, the FBI, they've kind of identified as white supremacists, Christian nationalists as the biggest national security threat,
They are.
domestic terrorism
And they
coming from
always
them.
have been.
Yeah, I mean this is nothing new, and obviously this goes back. Man, we could get into a whole long deep
We're
conversation
going to
on
have to
that
do a
too,
part
but
two.
we
we
do
just
because
might, just
we
might.
we did deconstruction. Now we need to go back to reconstruction and really get to where all
Exactly.
of this stuff started back after the Civil War. So yeah, I think we should plan on having you back on and do less about you specifically at that time and more just about history, theology, policy, getting to the nuts and bolts and stuff
I
because
love that. And here's the thing is despite the world burning,
mhm,
and never thinking that in my lifetime I would have to deal with actual Nazis or
mhm,
conversations around why the Holocaust wasn't that bad.
mhm.
The thing is that the fever's going to break. None
Yeah.
of this is sustainable, and I don't know how long that timeline is. For the Third Reich, it
Well,
was 15 years. Hopefully, it's not that long. But the thing is that
how long?
there's
How long until Donald Trump stumbles off the roof of the White House by
right.
accident?
Oh my
That would
god,
be. I think that'd be
that
a
would be
pretty
ideal. That would
hard.
be ideal. But one like we have all there's certain benefits that are happening. We have the Epstein files, which for
Mhm,
many people who are in the indoctrinated dogma space is breaking their blinders. They've
mhm.
also dropped the GOP has dropped all forms of pretense. They're not even trying to pretend anymore. They're openly lying, openly gerrymandering, and the Christian nationalism itself is exposing itself for the movement that it's always been, which is alignment with white supremacy, patriarchal power, and systemic abuse. So what they're doing is they're power drunk right now. And they're doing all these
Mhm.
things because they think that power is never going to end, and it will. And what's going to happen is people will never trust Christianity the way they did ever again. They're diluting its power. And when this fever breaks and we bring these systems down, we are going to have to rebuild a system based on what America always claimed she was, but has never been. And it's a matter of how long that timeline is and what the fallout is, but it's not sustainable. These movements have fully exposed themselves for what they are. And I truly believe that at the end of this, we will get a chance to build something worthwhile. Religion's going to lose its hold the same way it did in Germany. Nazi Germany was a 97% Christian nation. Christians loved Hitler. And like Dietrich Bonhoeffer was thrown out of his church when he criticized Hitler. And it's going to lose its power the same way that it did in Germany. And we're also going to see the bringing in of social systems because we're in end stage capitalism. When these cuts hit and people start to suffer, it's going to change the way that our system works. And so I think at the end of this mess is going to be a huge pivot point where this system is finally going to lose its power because it outed itself. They weren't smart enough,
Well,
or it didn't have enough foresight to keep the veil on a little bit.
we're hitting to another time. I mean, we've got some very difficult economic times ahead, and
Yes.
there's usually not much that motivates people to fuck shit up and make some changes, more than hitting them in the pocketbook. And I do agree that when all of this kind of breaks, that will really be the ultimate turning point, and we will go back to we'll start seeing a lot of things like we saw through the 20s and 30s, where you had people, outright rioting against their corporations that were oppressing them because we're doing all the same thing. I mean, they're talking about going back to script, company money, and company towns, and
Yep. Well, and when they
uh,
say make America great again and they've referenced the
mhm,
Gilded Age, that is the 20s. Like, and
mhm,
the two periods of time that Republicans controlled all three branches of government was 1920 to 1932 and right before the Great Recession in 2008. So it was Republican policies that are identical to what we're doing now that led us to the Great Depression. And it was the infusion of FDR's social programming that gave us the best economy the world's ever seen since from 1948 to 1972. And I think that we're in that 20s period, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt, and we're going to hit that Great Depression period. But then we're going to be able to make that pivot. And I think coming out of it this time, this Christian nationalism is not going to have the power it once had because people see it now.
No. I just wish we could have gotten through to that point without, all of this shit and done like more of just the Nordic thing of like, hey, this just seems like a good thing to do.
Like, we should just help each other so that everyone's life is better. What a concept.
Come on, we wouldn't be America if we didn't, do it our own special, destructive, and overly harmful way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also, the 250-year mark is typically the fall of empires.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, boy. Well, learn more next time.
Yeah.
Come back for part 2.
All right. Yeah, we will definitely get you scheduled on for a part 2 because this has been a great conversation. People in the comments have seemed to love it so far as well. And you definitely have a huge fan base out here. I've seen more Monty ! Comments coming through on the chat than I think I've had for any of our guests. And we've had some pretty big guests on. So you're quite the rock star, literally and figuratively here.
Trying.
We absolutely love you. Love having you on. This has been great. Please do all your shameless self-promotion. Plug everything you want to plug. What should people be looking for from you? Where should they follow you? What do you want them to know?
I am at Monte Mader on all social media, and it's MONTE like Monte Carlo, MADER. That's where you'll find me on everything. I also have a podcast called Flipping Tables, where I spend a lot of time talking about deconstruction, American history, and I have a lot of really cool special guests. Jordan's going to be on my episode for next week. And yeah, just keep an eye out for my upcoming book, which will be published next year.
Amazing. All right, guys. And once again, thank you, everybody who tunes in and catches these live when they happen randomly, and everybody else who tunes in every week when they're scheduled to post. You guys listening and giving us a little bit of your time is why we do it. Obviously, if you want to support, we've got subscriptions available on YouTube. I think still on Patreon, Substack,
And I do have a Patreon as well. Also, same name, but it's all the special things.
Absolutely. So if you like any of that as well, we've got merchandise. Offyourwagon.com gets Let Them Eat Toast merchandise and my regular merchandise there. But again, we just appreciate you guys listening. And go support Monty. Her content is great. If you like how I berate people, you're going to love how she does it because it's truly an art form. So thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to having you back very soon because we need to do this again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Monty, it was a great pleasure. It was nice to meet you, too.
Nice to meet you, Taylor.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, guys.